Hello, everyone. Eric Horst here. It's Monday, June 7th, 2021, episode number 41 of Training Café. So happy you decided to join in. If you're new to this, we do it twice a month. Every other Monday, we meet up here at the Training Café, and typically I have a topic of the day that I talk about for a few minutes. And then I answer some of your training questions. So if you have one, you're welcome to type it into the interface, the comments box. And I do appreciate, leaving your name and where you're watching from. This is a global audience that tunes in each time for a Training Cafe. And so it's fun to see kind of that international nature and where folks are tuning in from. So, if you've been watching these shows, I've been doing them for over a year. It was kind of a COVID initiative when I was locked down at home a year ago. I thought, what can I do with my time and reach out to the community that I love so much? And, with the lockdown, not able to travel or climb anywhere and see any climbers other than my family here at home, the Training Cafe was born. And so I continue it. Even here in this post-COVID era, hopefully you are in a location that I could be viewed as post-COVID. The lockdown is over here in the United States, and for the most part, things have opened back up. Restaurants are open, travel is, for the most part, open, and climbers are able to get out and do their thing. And there's exceptions. I know parts of Europe are still locked down, and that's frustrating, and frustrating even for us because we've been planning travel to Europe that's been delayed time and time again. So that's another story. Hey, before we forget, it's Training Cafe. You know what that means? It means we lift our coffee cups and sip together, commune over coffee talk, climbing talk, training talk, and so climbers around the world unite. Let's sip together. And let's move on to some cafe topics here. And first up is this episode's shout out. And it's got something in common with last episode's shout out. And that is that it's focused on the recent World Cups, the bouldering World Cups here in the United States. And 2 weeks ago, my shout out was to Natalia Grossman, a young American climber who won gold at the first of the two World Cups in Salt Lake City. Well, the second World Cup, which was last weekend in Salt Lake City, she won again, double golds, and this time with Janja Gambrit attending. And so it was a strong field. Janja has owned World Cup bouldering and has won 10, 12, 14 in a row prior to the COVID, shutdown of the World Cups. And so Natalia beating Janja and winning two golds back-to-back weeks is spectacular. And Sean Bailey, an American climber who's been around a long time. He's climbed, 515A, and he's competed in the World Cup circuit for a number of years, won gold in the second of the two Salt Lake City World Cups. So congrats to Sean, because that's huge. And I don't want to overlook Brooke Rabatou 2 weeks in a row, winning the bronze medal in bouldering. So combined, 4 Team USA gold, or I should say 4 Team USA medals in those back-to-back comps is the best showing ever for American climbers in a World Cup. So that's a pretty big achievement. So kudos to all those folks. And, a lot of Americans made it to semis. And so it was a pretty good showing all around. And, as someone who attended the first of the two events, USA Climbing and everybody involved in Salt Lake City did a great job putting this event together. So congrats to them. Let's move on here to the topic of the day, and then we'll get on to some of your questions. I see folks tuning in here, someone from Austria and closer to home, Georgia. And so as you check in here, type in your location where you're viewing from. And if you have a training question, I'll get to it in just a bit. Topic of the day is what it takes to open up a new grade, to level up, as the vogue saying today, that is heard quite often. And, if you're new to climbing, you may be opening up a new grade, achieving a new highest or maximum grade quite frequently, maybe every week, every month. If you're new to climbing, the learning curve is steep, progress is steady. It's really motivating, to an enthusiastic climber to be getting better week over week and seeing the improvements. But then, you're in the sport for a few years, you inevitably, experience plateaus, the improvement steady, levels off, and, things in your life change. And, any skill sport, you tend to improve rapidly at first, and then it's kind of, a flattening out over time. Same thing with physical gains from training. They're rapid at first. You start a hangboard program and you get stronger fast, and then it levels off. And so if you're in this sport for several years, making a strong effort, you'll see that steady improvement, but then will encounter that plateau. And so while it's frustrating, and some people quit the sport at that time, I hope that's not the case. If you love climbing, you should enjoy getting out and climbing routes of any grade, and the climbing experience and being part of the climbing community is fulfilling, regardless of whether you're opening up new grades or not. But it does demand a system to continue to improve for many years to come. And so that's what I'm going to give you some actionable points on here in this video, is, in terms of that system for somewhat steady improvement. And, so again, it doesn't take much thought the first few years to improve steadily. You go to the gym and climb a few days a week. You go outside and boulder or route climb a few days per week. You dial in your diet a little bit, do a few things in the name of training, and you'll get better. But then, you get into the moderate grades, 510, 511, 512, or maybe bouldering V5, V6, V7. Then that's often the territory where people start to plateau. And, everybody's different. If you're young and have great genetics and you're just a talented athlete, you might race to 513, to 7C plus, to V9 or V10. You might just naturally be able to, progress quickly to those levels. And then other people, like myself, took years to get up to the 513 grade. And I continue to climb at that grade for many years because I do have the skill set and I have the system to, even as an older climber, still climb at a high level. But progressing, in an activity that you've been in for many decades is hard. And for me, really, honestly, through my 40s, raising a family, having multiple jobs, there wasn't a lot of free time to climb. When you have little kids, it's challenging to get out and climb and work on projects. It's not going to happen when you have little kids, really. So there's phases in your life where you might even backtrack a little bit. But again, if you love climbing and kind of see it through and stay involved, things will change and you'll be able to, if you want to, get back in shape and continue to progress. And me, in my middle 50s, just last fall, I opened up a new grade. I climbed my first 8A plus, which is 513C. And perhaps I could have climbed that grade. I think I probably could have decades ago. I climbed, up to 8A, 13B back in the 80s and 90s. But I was never much of a long-term projector. As a weekend warrior, I like to do routes quickly. I didn't like to, camp under a route for weeks on end, and project. So that kind of held me back, just kind of that, that way about how I, preferred to climb. I like to do routes quickly, a couple of goes or even on-site or flash. And so that served me well, and I found that enjoyable. And, that's what climbing is about, is doing what you enjoy. Now, if you enjoy opening up the next grade, well, then you have to develop a system. And for me, being in my 50s, to open up a new grade last year, I had to get in my best possible shape for being 56. And I needed to really dedicate some time, something I hadn't done before, be willing to put in 3, 4, 5, 10 days on a project. And it just so happened the 513C that I did, a route called Angry Birds at the Red River Gorge, I ended up putting together fairly quickly, just 4 or 5 days of effort. I then moved on to another 513C that I thought maybe I would do just as quickly, and that wasn't the case. I got on a route called Silky Smooth, which was a very steep, crimpy resistance kind of climb. And I put in 10 days and still hadn't red pointed it when the season ended. And so I need to decide if I think I will return to that route this season at some point. But in any case, you need to find a system for where you are at. Your system won't be the same as the system I employed, nor the system that my 2 sons have recently employed to open up new grades. And let's talk about that for a moment, because kind of give me the proud papa moment here to share with you. My younger son, Jonathan, who is 18, did his first 514C, a route called Southern Smoke at the Red River Gorge last fall. So that's a very difficult grade. And at age 18, a pretty rare grade as well. And my older son, Cameron, who's 20, just a few weeks ago, did his first 9A+, which is 515A. And so that was a project he had worked on, about 15 days, of focused work on a route called Bone Tomahawk, spread out over about 6 weeks. And so he had a process. And so, for each of us, the process is a little different, but there's also some common threads that go through the process. And so let me give you some of those common threads, because no matter what grade you climb, some of these things will be relevant to you opening up that new grade. And the first thing, I guess, is to pick the right route. It should be a route that inspires you, because you're going to spend a lot of time on the route. So a route that you think looks cool, and that when you get on it the first few days feels enjoyable to work on. That's important, because again, you may be returning to it for quite some time until it comes together. And I think also the route, if you're trying to open up a new grade, is ideally one that caters to what your strengths are. If you're more of a boulderer, if you're a really competent, boulderer, then picking a sport route that has bouldery cruxes makes sense. If you enjoy, steep endurance, overhanging endurance routes, well, then picking that kind of route would make more sense than, say, picking a slab. So each of us tends to know what our strengths are and what type of climb we excel at. And I think if you're going to pick a route to project and try to open up a new grade, it should be something that is in that category. Everybody's a little different here, but a route that you can get to frequently is ideal. If your project route is in another country, well, then how many days a year can you get there? Or how long can you stay there to work on the route? Whereas if the project route is at a crag you can get to each weekend, that would be ideal, because you can kind of train during the week and get stoked and psyched, and then give it some working burns and some red point goes over the weekend. And maybe it's kind of in between, for me, my current project route, Silky Smooth, that I mentioned, is 9 hours away at the Red River Gorge. So I can't go there every weekend. I kind of need to pick and choose when I have longer periods to travel there for a week, and when the weather's going to be good. And so for me, it's probably going to be October till I get back on that route. And so it's kind of tucked back in my mind, and I'm thinking about it as I'm training, and it's kind of something I'm reaching for. But more short term, I have a couple routes in the 513 range that I'll get on, in the next month out in Wyoming and Colorado, that I'm kind of mini projects, you might view them. And so you might have a kind of a long-term ultimate project that you're going to work on slowly. Maybe it'll take a couple of seasons to get there, but then you might have some shorter term, process projects, mini projects that you can focus on and take off more quickly, and that help build momentum and help maybe get you, elevate your abilities towards that longer term project. When you are actually beginning to work on the route, let's talk about the system, kind of working a route. If it's the next grade, it's probably not going to go down in a day or two. It might take a few days. It might take a few weeks. It could take months or seasons. Adam Ondra took him a couple of years when he was working on Silence, the world's first 515D. Alex Mego, same thing, working on Bibliography, also a 515D. In both cases, I believe they spent a period of time in 2 or 3 consecutive seasons to work the route, then go home and train, do other routes to become a better climber in the process, and then return to the project when the weather was ideal, and eventually, stay with it long enough to kind of wear it down to the point that it was going to happen eventually. And that's something that if that next grade is a real reach for you, if you're a 12A climber, opening up the 12B grade is a lot easier than if you're a 15A climber trying to open up 15B. That just makes sense, so going from 12A to 12B, you might open up that grade in a few days of effort on the right 12B, going 12A to 12B. Going 13A to 13B might take a little longer, but still it might happen in a few weeks of work. But again, 15A to 15B would take a bigger effort, that's for sure. So in any case, getting back to the system of actually working the route, step number 1 is obviously to explore the route, kind of suss it out. And on the early attempts, feel no pressure whatsoever about needing to send it soon. Don't even go there. You're going up to kind of collect data to allow you to kind of size up the route and see if it is the right route for you. And so working it bolt to bolt is the first step. That might require you going in direct to a bolt and stick clipping up, to pull through some moves that you can't do. And I think it's important that first day to work, to the top of the route so you can kind of feel the moves, even if you can't do them all. When I first worked Angry Birds, I could not do all the moves. I had to, pull through and grab quick draws and, kind of, it's almost an A descent to get up the route, get through some of the boulder problem cruxes and, but that's the beginning step of working the process. So don't be hard on yourself, feeling like you're aiding the route, but just, know that that's how it's done. That's how Ondra worked Silence and Megos worked Bibliography, and every climber works the next grade. It happens in that way. So, begin to kind of, think about when you're a kid solving a puzzle. You dump the puzzle pieces on the table. What's the first thing you do? You start flipping the puzzle pieces over just to see what they are, what patterns and colors and shapes they are. And you're not really worried about building the puzzle just yet. And so that first mission, that first go of the route, you're kind of looking at the puzzle pieces and feeling it up. And then the next step would be to start to try to climb, 1 or 2 bolts in a row, maybe 3 or 4 bolts in a row. If there's an easier section, you can link, get some good links quickly. In the case of Angry Birds, the bottom 4 bolts was very, easy. So I could immediately link, the first 4 or 5 bolts up to the first crux. On the first day, I was kind of climbing from the ground up into the first, 8A crux, and then falling there. And then I would take and, work the crux a few times, eventually, get through it to the next bolt, rest. And then I would start to connect a few bolts above there. So you're beginning to kind of, after first working the route bolt to bolt, you're next trying to identify like logical sections of the route. In the case of Angry Birds, there's really three different chunks, a bottom chunk, a middle chunk, and then an upper chunk of the route. And so really, I very quickly had the route down to 2 hangs on like the second day, where I could, climb the first chunk and hang or fall and hang, then climb the middle chunk and fall or hang, and then the last chunk, climb it to the top. And you might quickly kind of have a sense of what the grades of each of those chunks are. For me, on Angry Birds, the first chunk, which has the actual crux of the route at the end of the first chunk, is probably around 13 AB. And then the middle chunk is more like maybe 12 C. And then the last chunk is 12 plus, something like that. Now it feels harder on Red Point because you're pumped and it's a very steep, 100-foot long route. There are some rests on it, but it's a pumpy route still. And so, I kind of quickly had a sense of what the 3 chunks were, and that it was definitely at my limit or beyond my limit that first day or two. But, I began the process of working on it. And then the next day I was able to link the second and third chunks so that I had the route down to 1 hang. And then at that point, once you have a route down to 1 hang, you can just, basically begin to do Red Point attempts from the ground. So it is a very well-known, tried and true technique to do what's called low pointing, where you, first climb, the last chunk up to the anchors, and then you keep starting lower and lower. And then you come down to the second chunk and try to make it to the anchors. And then, you keep adding on a lower point that you try to climb to the top. And then eventually you get to the point where you're starting from the ground and trying to climb to the top. And so that process of low pointing is something that will eventually get you to the point of, a big part of sending the route is getting very efficient. Obviously you have the moves, what the sequences are, the hands and the feet, but getting it dialed in almost instinctively so you can move very quickly through most of the route without a lot of thought. You become very efficient. You reduce the ATP cost of any given move to the minimum so that you have maximum endurance to climb the route. And so it's not just about figuring the moves out, but it's about dialing in the efficiency. Think of it as like a gymnast practicing a gymnastics routine over and over and over to keep refining it, becoming more efficient. And of course, gymnastics, you're being graded subjectively on your movement quality. And while we don't have judges grading us in climbing, you want to kind of be that judge. As you're working the route, ask yourself, are you doing the moves, very crisp and clean and efficiently, or are you kind of muscling through or just scraping through or thrashing through? You want to get away from the thrashing and get to the smooth and efficient. And that's the process of working the route for many, many days. And if the route is really low-hanging fruit, soft for the grade, really fits your style, you might be able to thrash up it and get a Red Point quickly. On the other hand, if it's a big step for you, maybe the route isn't exactly your cup of tea, exactly your climbing style, which was the case with Angry Birds for me, then it might be a longer mission to get it done. And so that does give you more opportunity to finesse and refine things to reach kind of this more perfect state, kind of a gold medal gymnastics performance that is required for you to send the route, everything to come together just right. And so again, it could be a few goes, it could be a few weeks. For me, Angry Birds ended up being, I think, 5 days. For my son Cameron, his project, Bone Tomahawk, which he just sent a couple of weeks ago, was 15 or 16 days of work spread out over 6 weeks. So, 2 or 3 days a week on the route, going through that process of refining and beginning to connect the chunks and, doing low points. And eventually you sense that the send is near, but you can have that sense and still, I think Cameron, like on day 8 or 10 was, messaging me saying, hey, I'm getting close, thinking it could happen any day. And it didn't, it kept day 13, day 14, day 15, until eventually it happened. And so that's when it can become more of a mental battle than a physical battle, is where you sense the send is near, but your frustration level is starting to rise because you're anticipating the send. Maybe you're getting tired of the process a little bit. And really to open up the next grade, especially when you get up in the high grades, it does take a very special person with mental toughness, for Andra and Megos and people like that. Margot Hayes working on the first female Senate biography, 15A, a few years ago. Coming back to that route takes character, takes the ability to deal with failure, because you fail over and over and over, and just to succeed one time. And so that's not for everybody. Some people aren't cut out for projecting at a high level. And for me, I guess that's part of why I was never a projector, is because just leading the life that I did, a weekend warrior, being busy, I didn't want to go climb on weekends and just fail weekend after weekend after weekend on a project. I wanted to send routes. That's the joy of climbing for me. And so it was my MO back in those days to never work on a route for more than 2 or 3 days. If I couldn't send it, I would move on to the next route. Now, in my old age, I have a little more time on my hand. The kids are out of the house. My wife and I are empty nesters for the most part. Actually, the boys are back here briefly at our house now between trips and, school's out. So they're here training at home for a brief time. But for the most part, we're empty nesters. And so that allows us to go climbing and not have the pressure of family obligations. Still have lots of work that I do. But I can, manage climbing and work just like you can, and most people do. Adam Andra went to college full time as he was projecting his 515s. And so I'm certainly a believer that you can do 2 things at a very high level, a career and climb, or school and climb, and still be able to progress and push things out. So you don't need to quit everything in your life to reach the next grade. That's a message I like to share. You just need to be efficient with your time management and be able to sacrifice some things. No doubt, probably 2 things that you're focusing your life on is about it. You need to eliminate a lot of little things, clutter in your life that steal your time and energy and money, your resources that you need to be able to travel and climb. And that really goes beyond the scope of this video, but that is part of the system, is sacrifice, no doubt about it. Sacrificing big things that you're just going to cut out of your life that steal time and energy, but also sacrificing things that, on a very nuanced level might be holding you back as well. Maybe things that you eat or drink, probably if you're drinking beer every night, it's not the best thing if you want to send your hardest ever project. So maybe you have to sacrifice that for the time being. I'm sure you can think of many little things that perhaps could be tweaked in your life to make your training more effective, your recovery more complete, and maybe your climbing, take off a little bit more. Let me just see, anything else on my list here? If you ever start to get burned out on a project, take time off. That's important. You can't just, if it feels like a job, if it feels like you're punching a clock going to the route, then it's time to take a week or more off. And that's actually something Cameron did when he was working Bone Tomahawk, because I advised him to do it. After he was a couple of weeks into the project, I'm like, Cam, you have to take a day, a week, and go climb for fun. Go do some easy routes, things that you can on-site, things you can do in a go or two. Go out with your friends and just climb for fun, and kind of get away from the project and think of it as a mini vacation from your project. And so doing that 1 day a week, or taking a week off and just going out and climbing easier routes, remembering what it feels like to send and clip the chains, is a good thing. Then you come back to your project kind of with a fresh mind, and kind of the pressure being off a little bit, and it just might go. And it's funny, the day Cam sent, he took 2 days off from the project, drove up to Salt Lake City. He met us at the competition 2 weeks ago, watched some of his friends compete at the World Cup, but he was in the audience, but he got away, like 5 hours away from his project, and broke the cycle of working the route and being where he was at. And then he drove back after that comp was over and sent the project the next day, even though he didn't have the best night's sleep. But that break was just what he needed. The send was near. So take breaks as needed, and kind of let the send happen. I think that's kind of the bottom line. And I think I heard Chris Sharma say this many years ago, is that if you are trying too hard to send the project, you keep going back and you keep trying harder and harder, and like you think you can will the ascent into happening, and maybe that'll eventually happen, but sometimes you just have to let go of the outcome and just say to yourself, I trust the process, and the send will happen when it's meant to happen. And and that's the approach that I used in sending Angry Birds. The day I sent it, I actually literally tied into the rope to my belayer and said, I don't feel 100%. I'm just going to go up and give it a couple of working goes. And so I had zero pressure on me. And what do you know? I climbed that first chunk and got through the crux of the route, that hard section at the end of the first chunk, and made it to the first rest. And I'm like, wow, that was interesting, And so then all I had to do was get enough back at that rest so that I could do what I had done before, which is low point it from that rest position to the top. And I did it, and I put it together. And so I sent it by not needing to. That's kind of the paradox there, is if you let go of the need to send and just go up and let the climb evolve organically, you actually probably stack the odds in your favor to sending the route. Okay, so I've talked for 30 minutes. Let's move on to some questions. And I can't hang on here too long. I got to wrap this up by 1 o'clock. I got a busy day ahead of me. I already got workout number 1 in. I have my fingers taped up here. I was up bright and early to get the first workout in. I'm doing split 2-a-days right now. And so, I do the first workout. It was a little over an hour. Take a 8-hour break to get significant work done. I've got a business to run, and I've got you guys to have a training cafe with. And then I will, late in the day before dinner, do my second workout. So that's often how I'm training at home, is 2-a-days. Okay, so let me just scroll back here and see what we got rolling here. Vinny from Denver, James Simpson is in the house. Adam says, any thoughts on benchmarks all climbers should be able to do with regard to bench press, pull-ups, deadlift, anything in general? Yeah, I'll tell you, these benchmarks are a real common thing these days. There's a lot of coaches getting into testing, and Lattice Training has this database they've been building out on terms of how much weight you can hold, or what % of your body weight you can hold on a 20 millimeter edge for 5 seconds. There's other people measuring pulling strength and deadlifting strength and all that. And, benchmarks are nice, if the testing is accurate and repeatable, that you can track progress. But I'm very hesitant of people that compare these benchmarks to other people, and say, well, I need to be able to do this number of pull-ups, or I need to be able to deadlift this or finger hang that to achieve another grade. Because if you look at the distribution, you see that, yes, this is, people that climb 514A can put this much finger force into the hold for 5 seconds, but it's a pretty broad distribution. And that is because climbing has so many other things than just finger strength, or just, core strength or pull-up strength. I don't have any important benchmarks to give out to folks because, again, technique and the mind really are 2/3 of the performance puzzle. And so if you become over-focused on those benchmarks and stop working on your technique and mental game, then you are setting up limits for yourself. And so you really got to always be working on all three areas. But an ultimate goal for a hard climber to boulder hard, to route climb hard would be to be able to hold your body weight for 5 seconds on a 20 millimeter edge. But that's quite difficult. That's kind of the 14A benchmark, though there are people that climb 14A that can't do that. And there's people that can do that can't climb 14A. So again, there's no hard and set rules. I think I'll just leave it at that. I'm not huge on, obsessing on benchmarks, that's for sure. Greetings from Iran. Hey, that's cool, Daniel. Question, how I should schedule my training in order to climb my 513 route smoothly. I route climb 1 day a week, 1 day fingerboard, 2 days. Yeah. So, I mean, that, climbing at the 13A level really does demand that you're a complete climber. So the finger training that you're doing a day a week and the specific training that you're doing a couple days a week is great. But to become the complete climber, the technique and the mental game, getting that dialed in as well, you need to climb a lot. And that's one thing that held me back for many years and holds many climbers back, is the ability to get on real rock. I mean, the gym is great. Going to the gym a few days a week is fantastic and important, but it's no replacement for climbing outdoors. And so, I had somebody recently ask me, they climb 13A and would like to do 14A, and what will it take? And I said, well, it'll take not only a really good training program, but it's going to take you climbing a lot outside. There's just all the gym climbing in the world probably isn't going to get you to 14A without climbing outside a lot. And I would say the same thing to you as a 513. Getting outside once a week is good. Can you find a way to do it twice a week, at least when the weather is ideal? Or certain times of the year, can you get more days outside? And that really puts you on the fast track to become a better climber. If your goals are to red point hard outside or boulder hard outside, you need to climb outside. The system wall, the gym climbing is great, but it's not a good representation of outdoor climbing. And while it does strengthen your muscles for climbing, you need to really develop outdoor climbing nuance, and that takes time climbing outdoors. Okay, next up, grades. Find it arguably the most debating topic at the crags. At some crags, one grade can easily be on-site, another grade. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Grades vary a lot from crag to crag. There are areas here in the United States like Smith Rock and the New River Gorge and Mount Charleston, where the grades are what we call old school. Those are early sport climbing areas, and the grades are very stout. And then there's the newer sport areas that have been developed in the last 10 or 20 years. Here in the United States, 10 Sleep, and there's others where you might say the grades tend to feel soft compared to the old school areas. It also has to do with what type of rock you're comfortable on. If you're used to climbing in limestone, it'll feel more natural to you than getting on granite sport routes. The granite sport routes will feel harder. If your home crags are granite sport routes and you're really good at that, well, then you go get on a limestone sport route and it might feel really hard. So there's a lot of factors going on. But yeah, the grades do vary crag to crag. And I enjoy, checking off routes of high grades as much as the next guy. You always have to recognize that, one route might fit you better than another. And, routes, some might be soft, some might be hard. Don't obsess over it. And it is kind of what it is. I'm not much into downgrading routes, because I think ultimately it should be a consensus. Yeah, I guess I'll just leave it at that. Okay. Christopher, talking about the early days of sport climbing, I think at some point we had also pink point besides red point. Yeah, absolutely. If you're new to climbing, you probably have never heard of pink point, but in the early days of sport climbing, and this is kind of a carryover from trad climbing where you would climb from the bottom and put your gear in. Red pointing back in the 1980s when sport climbing was beginning, it was considered a red point if you hung the quick draws every time you went up on the climb. And if you climbed and red pointed or climbed the route with the draws in place, that was called a pink point, because apparently you had cheapened the route or softened the grade a little bit by hanging draws. And, on a steep, powerful route, hanging the draws takes effort, takes time. It takes extra energy, does make it harder. But very quickly, as the routes got steep and really hard, all the hardest routes now are being climbed with the draws in place. When Adam Andre did Silence, he wasn't hanging draws. He was clipping the draws that he had hung there 3 years earlier when he started to work the route. And when I'm working my projects, the same thing. And so the distinction of red point and pink point has kind of been lost, and people just talk about red pointing as climbing the route bottom to top, clipping your rope into the draws, but not placing the draws. In trad climbing, I think still most people to call it a red point, after a failed attempt to take your gear out and put it back in each time. So I think that pink point definition has been held a little bit more in the trad climbing world than in the sport climbing world. Yeah, in the How to Climb 512 book and my early training for climbing books, I talked about HIT training, which stands for hypergravity isolation training. It was a method of climbing on a system wall, like on repeated crimps with a weight belt on. You could progressively increase the weight over time. So the holds weren't changing. The holds stayed the same. It was meant to be a non-technical sequence of climbing on crimps that over time you would increase weight. So it becomes a very specific training exercise that is measurable and trackable. You could also climb on pockets. You could also climb on pinches. So I had actually made for a company called Nycros about 15 or 20 years ago, a system set of holds called hit strips and hit pinches that you could mount on a 45 or 50 degree overhanging wall. And it was very nice because, you knew exactly what you were grabbing. They were identical strips. Well, I've stopped working with Nycros long ago, and although they may still sell those systems, I don't really promote it as much. You can do the same thing on a system wall, even on a home bouldering wall. I think it is important to have virtually identical holds and have a repeatable sequence. So that was the beauty of the HIT system that I designed for Nycros. And there's hundreds or thousands of those systems in climbing gyms and home gyms around the country. I have one here in our home gym that I use very regularly. So it's still totally valid. It's just I've kind of stopped marketing it because it's not essential, though it is a beautiful way to build your system wall for this type of training. You could get 10 identical crimp holds or make 10 identical wood crimps and screw them in kind of in a ladder configuration that you can move up and down and do this HIT protocol that I developed. And it's very, very effective at developing specific strength, twist lock strength, pocket strength, pinch strength. I think there's a tremendous validity to it. Yeah, exactly. Pink pointing, just circling back to that. So, but again, in sport climbing, that distinction's been lost. Okay, Mickey recently left the Red River Gorge, didn't send Paradise Lost, which is a great hard 13A. All the moves felt easy, but couldn't put it together. Did max hangs and bouldering prior to the trip. Should I have done repeaters? Absolutely, you should have done repeaters, yeah. I've been on that route. I haven't sent it yet. I need to go back to it. Really great route, and it's got kind of two cruxes. There's a low crux that's maybe a mid-range 12, and then there's the red point crux up on an overhanging arete that is more of a resistance crux. Like he said, there's no individual move that's probably over V4 on that upper arete, but it's a lot of steep climbing on consistently small holds. So it is a strength endurance route, absolutely. And so repeaters would be the ideal way of training. If you would do like a 4-week block of repeater training, I'd still do 1 session a week of max strength, hangs, but 2 sessions a week of repeater training and 4x4 training. That would be much more specific for a route like Paradise Lost. Okay, any thoughts on 6 on, 10 off times 4 weighted hangboard protocol? So that would be 6-second hangs, 10-second off times 4 weighted hangboard protocol. Yeah, he says for his forms, it feels like a nice balance between endurance and strength. Here's the problem I have. You want to, if you go back and revisit some of my energy system podcasts, to really be effective at higher end, if you're a more advanced athlete, you really need to target your training. And so, to be, splitting, trying to train strength and endurance together isn't the most effective way to do it. So you might feel like you're getting a good workout, but I don't know that, long-term use of that program will give you increases in both areas. I think doing more of a traditional max strength weighted hang protocol, 12 seconds on, 3 minutes off, where you can really go heavy, or my protocol that I developed a decade or more ago and promote in my books, and myself and my sons use it almost exclusively, is 7 seconds on, 53 seconds off. That 53-second rest is enough for phosphocreatine resynthesis to play out about 70% of the way after doing a 7-second max hang. And so you do 753 times 3, and then you rest 3 minutes, and then you do a few more blocks of 753 times 3. And so I think that is a really good max strength protocol for an advanced climber. Eventually, if you can progress to doing one-handed max strength training, which is what my sons do, that is a good, elite level technique that I can't do, really. And then for more strength endurance, the 7-3 protocol is better. And here's why. If you're on a hard red point route, you're grabbing a hold, pulling, reaching, and your grip progression is more like 5 seconds on, 5 seconds off, or 7 seconds on, 3 seconds off. You're getting just these little sips of blood flow, little micro rests. And that's what the 7-3 protocol does. You're 7 seconds on, and then 1, 2, 3, 7 seconds on, 1, 2, 3, 7 seconds on. And so it is a true strength endurance protocol that mimics the way we climb and trains the muscles very specifically, I think. Some people do a 10-second on, 5-second off repeater, and they do 4 of those. And that I think is okay also. If you have really sweaty hands where you need to chalk up between each hang, then you have to do the 10-5 because you can chalk up quickly in that 5-second break. If you're doing 7 on, 3 off as a repeater protocol, the 3 seconds is not enough to chalk. It's enough to shake 1, 2, boom, right back on 3. And so, I don't need to chalk on repeaters, and so I use the 7-3 protocol. Seba, tuning in from Belgium. Thanks for joining us. AE Climbing, watching from the Philippines. Thanks for joining us. Okay, let's see here. A few more questions, and I got to bail out in a few more minutes. Next up, Xenon87 says, I realize that I can pull and boulder much, much harder when grunting during moves. It's remarkably effective. But I look like a show-off or a bad dude. Should I try to change that or embrace it? Yeah, definitely embrace it. And, there's some sports science behind that. If you yell on a maximal effort, you can express a little more strength and power. There are some hard moves where you have to hold your breath to kind of get into the position to, create the tension that you need. And then as you're completing the move, you're breathing out or yelling to breathe out. It's a tactic that Adam Ondra famously does, with all his yelling. And it does look like theatrics, but there's efficacy to it and, and science behind it. And so, if yelling helps you out, do it. Now, if you're yelling on V0 moves or on 5-10, then, maybe your friends have a point that you're putting on a show. But, if you're climbing near your limit and yelling, then I think it's totally prudent. So great comment here about the pandemic taught me to appreciate and love climbing even more, less pressure on projects, enjoy. Yeah, that's it. If you go out every day and just be thankful that you have your day outside climbing or your day at the gym climbing, it was for many people taken away from them for a long time because of COVID. And for some people that have life-changing events, my best friend lost his fingers to frostbite, and that was the end of his rock climbing career. So climbing can be something that is taken away from any one of us at any time, and so you really have to just love climbing for what it is and appreciate every day that you're out there. Okay, David says, any tips for finger strength gain for a 50-year-old and up? Yeah, well, I'm a 50-year-old and up, and a few things here. First of all, you can get stronger, no doubt about it. As an older climber, you need to really train smartly, do something active every day, but not the same thing, is really, really important. Finger training might just be 3 days a week. And I don't know what your loading history is, how many years you've climbed and trained up to this point. If you have an extensive loading history like I do, well, then I can do things like 2-a-day training and, doing 4 sessions a week. And, because my connective tissues have really become so strong over all those years. If you're someone that just got into climbing a few years ago and you're in your 50s, then I would be very, very careful, because your connective tissues take years to get stronger, and so your muscles get stronger faster than your connective tissues, and you end up injured. And so you need to be very careful. And so I say get onto a steady program of doing some fingerboard training and some bouldering, where you're 2-3 days a week, and seeing kind of what you get out of it. Staying very self-aware to whether you develop any pain in your fingers or elbows or shoulders. Obviously having good technique and good nutrition is important, and good rest and recovery is important. Again, younger climbers can get away with a lot of crap in their diet and their life, and be a strong climber despite that. If you are an older climber like us, you need to do more things right and fewer things wrong that detract. And also, if you're at the elite level, the pro climbers, like, I mentioned Megos and Andra a lot because they're at the top of the game. And those guys, their diet is dialed in. They don't drink, they don't do drugs. They're doing everything right because they're professional athletes. They're every bit of pro as the top, track and field person, or basketball or baseball player or marathoner is. They are doing everything right. And so, most of us, that would be over the top. But again, for an older person wanting to make gains, you can make gains, but you really have to dial things in. Body weight, not just your finger strength is important, but the numerator in strength to weight ratio is important. And for climbers of any age, but especially older climbers, if you're hauling around 10 or 20 extra pounds around your midsection, you can actually lose that and realize gains in finger strength faster than you can through a fingerboard training program. Okay, 2 more questions, and then I'm going to sign off here. Do you suggest isometric pulling exercises like front lever for leading and bouldering? Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Front levers, naturally, people tend to hold them for 5 or 10 seconds, and that's a pretty good strength training exercise. good core exercise. You need to do a variety of things for the core. Just doing front levers isn't enough. And obviously, when you're doing fingerboard hangs, that's an isometric exercise. There's a strength endurance exercise that I developed called Frenchies, where you do pull-ups and you lock off for 3 seconds, and then you do a pull-up and lock off here for 3 seconds, and then you do another pull-up and lock off here for 3 seconds. And that type of isometric training develops strength in different portions of the range of motion, and it is more of a anaerobic, lactic type exercise, so more of a strength endurance exercise that tends to pay off quite well in rock climbing. That being said, you shouldn't go to the gym and just do all isometric training, because climbing is a dynamic activity. And so doing lots of climbing type maneuvers, if you're strong enough and can do it with good technique, doing things like some campus training and system walling is appropriate as well. So yes, some isometrics, but not the focus of the program, that's for sure. Any tips for strength gains for older climbers avoiding injuries? Yeah, so this I just answered 2 questions ago for David in terms of, getting on a disciplined program a couple of days per week, doing some hangboarding, nothing crazy. It should be very slowly progressive, increasing the weights, the loads, maybe the reps, very, very gradually over time, being sure you get enough rest between sessions so that not only your muscles can recover, but your connective tissues can recover, which they do more slowly. Getting enough protein in your diet so that your muscles and connective tissues can recover optimally, and not doing anything to tempt injury, because injury will shut you down and make you weaker at any age, but especially as an older climber, injury is potentially something that can bring an end to your climbing season or even climbing career if it becomes, if you blow out a shoulder or something else, quite traumatic. The little tweaks and pains, you take a week off and you can usually work through them and it never gets worse. But again, you need to be aware of that and not try to train through those pains. When you have a pain, heed the warning, take a little time off and let the problem correct itself. Do rehab and prehab type exercises with the goal of, strengthening connective tissues and preparing yourself for harder training that you will do in the future, and then slowly build the training intensity and frequency over time. Okay, so that about does it. We've put an hour in here at the cafe. Time for me to punch out from this shift and get to work on some other projects. And as I said, I have another workout myself to do this evening before I can reward myself with dinner. Wrap things up with a final sip, my friend. And I hope to see you in 2 weeks. I'll be doing the next training cafe from the road. I'm traveling west to Colorado and Wyoming, so I'm not quite sure where that next cafe will be. Hopefully it'll be 2 weeks from today, but if I don't have internet, then it might get delayed a week. But follow me on Instagram and on Twitter and on Facebook and all those social media platforms. Eric Horst Training for Climbing. If you follow, you can stay in touch with what I'm doing and when the next training cafe will be out. And if you have a question that just popped into your mind, write it down and submit it at the start of the next training cafe, and I will get to it then. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, please share it around. Tell a friend to join in the next training cafe. Subscribe to the Training for Climbing YouTube channel. You'll get notification of the next episode. And I hope to see you then. Bye-bye.